All right, we'll see if this works here. Igor, I'm going to put you.
I don't hear you now.
Let's go back here. All right, I'm just jumping back to this screen here. Welcome, everybody. Unfortunately, we've had a bunch of technical difficulties. Oh, we had this nice intro, and we were ready to, to talk about the impact that we have experienced now, or we will be experiencing with this figure right here now as the president-elect of the United States. Now, we realize that we just, when it comes to our live Q&A, we couldn't let this go unnoticed. And so we're still going to answer questions for sure. Like I said, this is round 2. Igor and I thought we were going live, and for whatever reason, it wasn't working. So I had lots of really fun things that I said in the last one that you guys will never get to see. So we're going to reset, and we're going to start over. And unless you were, I don't know, unless you're in some kind of a dark cave somewhere for the last 2 months with no access to any news or media or reporting. Yes, there was a U.S. election in the U.S. yesterday. And yes, the president-elect and former president of the United States, Donald Trump, will be back in office. And the question is, how will Trump impact Canadian immigration? Now we could talk about big picture, what will the impact be on, the whole geopolitical issues that are going on in North America right now, but we're going to focus on immigration. We're going to talk about, just a bunch of things, but I want to first off, for those of you who maybe are in the US and are wondering, well, man, now that he's around, I seriously am looking at Canada, looking at the options. What we want to do is push you back over here to our Holthe Immigration Law website. It's just holthelaw.com. And Igor drafted a fantastic little blog post. We'll just pull Mr. Trump off of there, president-elect. And this blog post right here, Immigration to Canada for U.S. Citizens, Top Pathways After the 2024 Presidential Election. And the reason we did that is because, heck, Kamala Harris could have been elected, and there might have been a bunch of Americans saying, I'm moving to Canada. So either way, Trump or Kamala, we felt this was a win-win. And so Igor went through and created a bunch of different pathways. We're not going to go through these in detail. There will be a podcast 2.0 that I will be doing with my good friend Betsy Kane. We're going to record that and release that also later today. That goes into just a few more thoughts on the exact pathways and what options are available. It's a 2.0 because Betsy and I did it back in 2016, which, the first time Trump came in, there was all that hoo-ha about people moving. Now, in reality, guys, people didn't really move from the US. Some may have, but by and large, most didn't. And so we're basically going to talk about what is happening right now, what this means for Canada, and we'll get to some of your questions as well. So don't be afraid to post your comments. We've got a bunch of people that are jumping in right now. But I really want to focus on this issue and the impact of Trump on Canadian immigration. So, Igor, what are your initial thoughts when we think about where we're at right now and what this could mean for Canada?
I'll have to start that I am a dual citizen of Canada and Ukraine, so I have a little bit different views on everything because I have to keep in mind the interests of at least 3 countries, right? So US, obviously, as people elected the president who will address their social and economic and political needs in US. I'm a citizen of Ukraine, so I'm obviously concerned about the war in Ukraine. And I'm also a citizen of Canada, so I'm also concerned about how this will impact Canada. And there are so many competing thoughts in my head right now, but I would say that we will see a lot of changes in how US handles immigration and how the immigration will be handled in Canada. And right now, what I can see is that it appears that now we have a North American trend on limiting immigration to both to Canada and United States. And so the question remains where all of those people with unregulated immigration status will go, how the cross-border trade will be happening for the next little while, for the next couple of years. And then the situation that we're discussing right now will obviously be very different following the October 2025 elections in Canada. And so we have to, looking in the future, we have to consider what will happen to Canada before the October elections and what will happen to Canada after October elections, regardless of who comes to power. So hard to tell exactly in one sentence exactly what I think, but I think we'll see a lot of changes, and some of them will be positive, for sure. We always have to keep our glass halfway full, and some changes will be quite brutal.
Yeah, absolutely. People have to expect change. Now, one of the things I want to start off with you guys is that, like Igor said, there will be an election, and there's a very good chance that the Conservatives could be elected in the same way that the Republicans were in the United States. And we know that often those parties tend to be more aligned in terms of their immigration policies. So the alignment of Canadian and US immigration policy is something you have to be aware of. What are those policies? Well, obviously the Republican, one of the wedge issues, which unfortunately becomes, and it will become once again this coming year for our election, and I guess maybe they will trigger an election sooner. I seriously doubt it, Igor. The reality is, despite whether or not people say this is just some kind of a little a jab at the MPs, there are a number of MPs that will benefit significantly if the election happens in later October or whenever, because they'll get their pensions, and it's not something to be ignored. It's a reality. So I think it'll be pretty unlikely that there'll be an early election triggered. But with that being said, if the Conservatives are elected, there is more of a shift to restrictive immigration policies. And it could be that way in both countries, which is an interesting thing to look at. Because if both countries are tightening, like let's say if the US in the short term, if they're tightening their grip, then you would expect that people would look to Canada. And I look to the H-1B open work permit holders. We assisted many of them when that H-1B open work permit program was open in Canada for 10,000 to come to Canada. But the interesting thought is, okay, if the Conservatives come in, will there be restrictions placed that will narrow that pipeline or availability from someone who's disaffected or disenfranchised in the US to then come to Canada and under those same circumstances? So all of you H-1Bers out there who watch the live stream, who watch the videos that we do, if you have an open work permit, you need to make sure that you capitalize on it and use and take advantage of it sooner, and don't wait, because we just don't know what's going to happen. Now, if the work permit's issued, it's going to be valid and it's not going to expire. But if you're going to look to make a move, it's probably better to do it sooner than later. But Igor, the Liberals right now, if their mindset was very open borders and pro immigration, wow, have they done a 180? When I look at what they're doing, I would have expected the Conservatives to do this. And so they're almost in a way doing the dirty work of the Conservatives before the election in hopes that this public perception of, that's starting to become more negative towards immigration, that they can capitalize on, showing that, look, we're making changes. And what I've heard from them often is, we're listening to you. Well, okay, who's saying this stuff? Well, maybe there's starting to become a shift that's more anti-immigration in our country, which is unbelievably disappointing if that's the case. But that's one of the things, is just this alignment of Canadian and US immigration policy. Now, I do want to point out, yes, there's shared goals in reducing temporary residence, without a doubt. I think that's a reality. But Igor, when I think about the Conservatives, I think the one area where we're going to see more of a tightening up is a more of a balanced approach to the humanitarian and the public policies that are put in place, to help facilitate individuals in certain countries that are, that the government has deemed, there's a need to help them, like whether it's the Iranian policy, Hong Kong, whether it's Ukraine even, right? Those kinds of policies, I don't think would have happened in the way they did under a conservative government. But on the economic side, they created express entry. They're the ones that designed it. They tend to be much more pro-economic. And so I wouldn't expect to see a significant change. And in fact, maybe as if you guys are that are watching this are more on the economic side in terms of what are our options in Canada, as skilled workers and the like. I think the world under conservatives would probably create more space for you, if we're looking at just straight numbers. But I'm actually hoping to get some representatives from both parties to come join us and talk about what their policies really are and where they're going. But I am going to go through some of the policies of the conservative government that we know they've talked about or hinted about, just so that you guys are aware how this could be impacted if the conservatives got elected. You can't ignore it. Okay.
And Mark, maybe I can also add here, for those of you who just joined the channel or did not watch our previous episodes of the live Q&A, or don't know me and don't know my immigration story, long story short, I used to live in the United States, and I hopped in one of the last trains before Canada closed for COVID-19 lockdown, and I could immigrate after spending 3 years in the United States, living in the US under Trump presidency. So I've been there. I know what it was like. I don't want to go into details about my immigration situation in the US, but what I can tell is at that time, when Trump came in and was in power, Canada was so much more open. And that is the biggest difference between the 2016 election and 2024 elections. So at that time, if you did not want to live in the United States, for example, or let's say you wanted to benefit from having a permanent residency in Canada and at the same time maintaining your status in the US, you could do it. Now, the pathways are very much limited. And unlike 2016, not everyone can qualify for immigration to Canada. Yeah. So when you think about how the US immigration landscape will change Canadian immigration landscape, we cannot look at the statistics back from 2016 because the world was very different. Now the stats will be much lower, and so we will see a much less noticeable spike in immigration from US to Canada, just because Canada doesn't have as many avenues available to those US citizens.
Yeah. And that's super, super important, because we have all of many of the folks that watch our live streams, they're already in Canada. Their work permits are expiring. Their options are running out. And if you have not yet subscribed to our Time's Up series, I strongly encourage you to do that. We have been pushing out a number of episodes within our podcast. Our videos have been focused on that particular series. And if you go to our YouTube channel here, I'll just shift over. We'll stop this one here. Our Time's Up series, we've got 3 that have been released. So how can I change? Can I change to a visitor status? The high cost of staying illegally in Canada. What to do when your work permit is expiring. These 3 podcast episodes, really they're vodcasts. Strongly encourage you guys to take a look at these and watch them. Those of you who have not yet had a chance to do so, because we talk about the situation that you're in. We talk about the fact that there is fewer and fewer options. And now, let's face it, when it comes to the reduction in temporary residence, yes, that will potentially put less pressure on the permanent resident programs, but the overall numbers for immigration, as we've discussed, are going to be reduced. And if you have 2 countries, once again, that are both reducing options, there is no release valve, because Canada, you're right, Igor, was the release valve for people who realized, man, I don't have any options here. I might as well move to Canada, or I can't get my H-1B work permit extended, which is really one of the next items that I want to talk about, is just the increased barriers for US-based talent. So right now, even as it is, the H-1B workers who traditionally are the high human capital in the US that are the best candidates to come, there just isn't, those same opportunities for them. It's been a while, Igor, since I have found someone that does not speak French that has ranked high enough to receive an invitation to apply in Express Entry. And it makes sense. If we have all of these individuals in Canada already who do not have spots, well, they're going to have higher human capital and higher CRS scores than individuals outside because of their Canadian studies, the points they get for that, either 15 or 30 extra points, their Canadian work history. If they've got, if they're single, they have up to 40 points, 35 in the first year if they're married. So all of those things play a role. And, it'll be also interesting, Igor, because our former Minister of Immigration, Minister Sean Fraser, was all about tech. In fact, he appeared at the Collision Conference a few years back and highlighted that Canada is a great country for digital nomads. Is that the case today? Not so sure. That it's a great place for tech. Well, is that the case? Well, when was the last STEM draw that we had, even from that standpoint within the category-based draws? So tech and business talent that are often redirected to Canada, it's going to be harder to do that.
And Mark, maybe if we talk about STEM draws, we also need to emphasize that STEM has been removed from the priority categories for the new immigration levels plan. Mm-hmm. So they will not even target STEM occupations anymore. And like when you talk about if Canada is a great country for startups and tech and specialized occupations like programmers and designers and H-1Bers, right? Those who have the H-1B visa. We can also look at how many U.S. citizens actually moved to Canada in the next in the last couple of years, and how many Canadians moved to States. Yeah. So, like right now, we know that. And Mark, maybe we can also share the screen over there. I think it's the. Let me just take a look. I think
Which
it's.
Page?
It's the last. Let me share.
Is it your blog post or what?
No. So I found this piece on CTV.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
I sent you the link in.
Yeah. Sorry, 1 second.
In Teams.
Let me pull this up. So the last one.
Yeah.
Okay. Here we go. On the fly, you guys. This is how we roll, on the fly. Is this the one, Igor?
Yes, exactly. And then if you scroll down, there will be a graph with the number of US permanent residents moving to Canada. So take a look at this graph, right? So we see a steady climb, and then we had COVID-19 pandemic when Canada was locking up, and that resulted in this drop. But then that was also the time when Biden was the president, and we can see that the numbers for 2021 kept climbing, right? So more Americans were coming to Canada. But then, Mark, if you scroll just a little bit, so that's the second paragraph, right? So according to American census data, 53,000 who were born in Canada moved to the United States in 2022. Same year, only 10,415 US citizens were granted permanent residency. And 9,243 of the US born people became Canadian citizens. So we can see that, in fact, what happened is more people left Canada than were coming back from States. Yeah. And that is an interesting trend. And my presumption is that this trend will now continue, at least for the next year or so. Many people who are conservative in mind will not want to remain in Canada and may want to move to the US, and then the other way around. So people who are not happy with conservative liberal approach conservative approach will move to Canada because we are more liberal right now in our policies. But that will change in 1 year.
Yes, absolutely. So as we look at these things, obviously this is all, we're speculating to some extent, and that's fair. But one thing we do know is that there are an enormous number of people that have been allowed into the United States that do not have direct pathways to permanent residence or to citizenship in the U.S. And in the past, this was a direct consequence. We saw many more people seeking, refugee or asylum status in Canada because their options in the U.S. were limited, whether it was, directly Trump or his policies. but this is a reality. And so I expect that there's going to be a lot more strain. And, we don't know to what extent they're going to deal with, things like the Roxham Road, where there's illegal crossings, how the Safe Third Country Agreement could be impacted. All of these things, I just want to bring them up because I think there's going to be a lot of challenges for our refugee system. And obviously, if Canada is seen as an alternative, and there are no options in the US, people will look to wherever they can go. So, and if there's a conservative government, to what extent will there be more of a reciprocal kind of shared policy on refugee limitation? That's a factor that could come into play as well. So you've got your increases in the PR pathways, like the restrictions to the PR pathways. It's possible that, as more and more people are continuing to vie for those spots, if the conservative government ties, for example, immigration to housing bills, which is one of the things that they've discussed, exactly how is that going to happen? But one thing's easy: if they don't feel like any houses are going to be built, then they're not going to keep the annual levels plans the way they are. There may not be a direct correlation, but they're going to estimate, well, we project there's going to be this many houses built, and so therefore we are going to only allow these many permanent residents in. So, yeah. As we continue down the path here, what's going to be the impact on study permits and international students in Canada? Well, the US, I have to assume, is going to continue down the path they have been, which has been a little bit more measured in terms of their approach, because from what we've seen, Canada has allowed in as many international students as the entire US did over the past few years. So that also plays a role. And if a conservative government is elected, Igor, do you see them softening that or opening that up anymore back to the old days, the way it was under the Liberal government?
Like what I find peculiar about Canadian politics right now, and I'm still learning the whole thing, because I just recently became a Canadian citizen and was not really interested in how politics functioned in Canada. So I like, and again, this is just my personal perception, but what I see happening is conservatives started ringing the bells saying, we have too many people, we have to do something about it, we have to cut down on immigration. And then when we had Justin Trudeau announcing that they will accept 500,000 people in 2025, and that announcement came in November last year, less than a year later, Justin Trudeau, as you said, 180'd and then reduced the numbers. To me, it seemed like the policies suggested by Conservative Party were adopted by Liberals, and essentially, again, this is just my own perception. Those who broke the system now trying to publicly fix it before the elections, and they essentially adopted the same policies that Conservatives proposed, implemented those, so that when Conservatives come, there's nothing to fix anymore. And essentially, the only thing that Conservatives can do after they get reelected, if they get reelected in 2025, is to continue on with this trend and tighten it up even more. So I do not see a single chance for liberalization of our immigration policies. I think they're going to be at some point even stricter than the U.S. policies, because in the United States, how more stricter can you go? Like there are not too many pathways to green card in the U.S. Yes, you can win a lottery, which is a good option for some people, but again, it's a lottery, right? And the likelihood of winning your green card is too low. We know that Trump was trying to get rid of the lottery system, but that didn't happen. Maybe it will happen this time, but probably that's the only restriction that they can implement south of the border right now, because other than that, realistically, and as I spoke with many different immigrants, when they come to these states on a temporary status, they understand, okay, my only chance is lottery, getting married, or claiming political asylum. Those are the only three pathways to permanent residency in the US. So I don't think they can restrict it even more. Like that's the very extreme restriction that we have right now in US. In Canada, there are so much more to go. We still have so many different ways how immigration can be restricted. So I think like in the next couple of years, we'll see major changes in Canadian immigration rather than in US immigration.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think, as you look at the influence that, politics has on immigration, even public sentiment, real or perceived, it doesn't matter. If there's even a perception that people, one of the political parties, whether liberals or otherwise, are going to start losing votes because of their immigration policies, well, then they get changed. And I've never been more amazed at how much power the media has in influencing immigration policy in this country. I can't think of, well, I can think of a number of different programs and policies that were created as a result of, the mainstream media and their exposés on various things, pulling up different families and compassionate stories that basically shine a light on the disappointment and the heartache that can exist within immigration. And that's no different than today, that public shaming in the media drives immigration policy development. And so we see now this shift, right? There's this immigration becoming a political wedge. It was for the US and it is in Canada. It will be. There's no way of getting around it. The Liberals are trying to head it off, but basically they're saying, well, yeah, we agree that aggressive immigration policies are probably not in the best interest of the country. They're aligning, like you said, with the Conservatives. And ultimately this, the whole concept of public sentiment influences future policies in Canada. So, what are the Conservatives, what have they actually said, Igor? That's the question. What are their policies? What do they actually believe in? Or what have their members been hinting at or discussing? What is the party leader, Pierre Poilievre, what has he said on it? So just as we wrap things up here with this discussion, I want to just go through some of the things that we have seen in the media, that we've seen within different policy positions that they have stated. But let's go through. I've got a list of about 8 different things that I think people really need to pay attention to. The first one is a comment that was made by Pierre Poilievre, which basically said that they were going to look at linking immigration to housing capacity. And I'm just going to pull up a few comments here. RS says, isn't housing provincial government responsibility? Can you dig into that a bit? Yes. But here's what happens. Municipal funding and any funding that comes from the federal government or any provincial funding, municipalities and provinces, they do govern the building and oversight of housing builds. But if their builds are tied to payments coming from the federal government, well, that is how they influence. So we're not going to pay you unless you complete, this number of builds by a certain set period of time. And we've also heard comments that, and if you're ahead of the game, then maybe we'll give you bonuses, right? So money is the thing that drives these decisions. So, but that's a great question, RS, about the responsibility. So even though this is within the purview of the provincial government's housing builds and the municipalities who grant the business licenses or the building permits to actually build the homes, there was an interesting video montage that Pierre Poilievre did. I think I caught it on YouTube or X, I can't remember, that talked about this situation with housing builds and how the infrastructure, the bureaucracy that's involved in just getting permits is one of the main contributors to pushing up the cost and the ability to build. And it's right. If we have multiple levels of bureaucracy, that you have to go through to get something done, it delays it. Now, often they're there for a reason, to ensure that things are done right, and that builds are done in accordance with the actual long-term plans of communities and things like that. It's not just like, here's a permit, build whatever you want, right? There are restrictions, architectural controls, there's a bunch of different things. And so those things take time. But one of the things the Conservative government have said is, we're going to deal with this. We're going to get the houses built. And so if they tackle, immigration to housing builds, right now, the way our system is set up, that will have a direct impact, just in the ways that we've talked about.
And Mark, maybe I can also add one of the thoughts that I have. And again, this is a speculation. As we speak about the housing crisis, do you think, and I know we've not discussed this before, but do you think there is a likelihood that following the elections in Canada, or like sometime in the future, we'll see a program similar to H-1B for undocumented construction workers in the United States? I know we had a program in Ontario for the construction workers in GTA,
Undocumented. Yeah.
but given Canada's economic needs and desperate need for people who can build houses and work in trades, do you think that's possible? Like, I personally, I think it is possible, because I see there are some comments from, let's say, Andy Rodriguez. He says there are going to be a lot of skilled workers without status in the USA that will consider federal skilled worker, PNP, for occupation and construction, food service, agriculture. That's good, but to qualify for those programs and to fit into provincial, new, very restricted provincial caps, that's going to be a problem. So my take is probably there might be a possibility for some kind of special programs targeting people who can build houses.
It'll be interesting to see how all of this plays out over the next near term. We know that, you know, the governments that are in power, it's really easy to look back in hindsight and say, man, did you guys screw up? Right? Like, I think about the impact of the pandemic, and we've had other people make comments, you know, about how that's led to a lot of this. You can't remove that reality. Like, even in Canada, the decision to try to push forward with all the numbers, it went through a little bit of a rough spell because of COVID, and then they instituted some very, very liberal PR programs to try to transition more people into permanent residence. And, you know, the reality is they took their eyes off of the infrastructure. And there were some other comments here. I think it's RS who was making a bunch of stuff. Let's see. He says, how much is the whole Canadian population? 64 million. You're saying this country is full. It's not a geographic, you know, situation we're talking about, RS. It's not a situation where the land mass is so big, because there should be no reason why a house in Southern Ontario is like 4 times as expensive as one across the border, like literally across the line, a similar house. You know, the problem is the availability of those homes, and that there are enough properties being built. And then there's other issues which, that are driving. And I guess, do you know what? I'm going to shift Igor back here, and I want to talk some more about the actual conservative policies, and just dive in a little bit deeper into these. And so, at least the policies that have come out in response to questions that they've shared. I haven't gone in to look at their actual internal policy documents, but we know reduction in overall immigration targets is something that they're looking at, you know, which is basically echoing the Liberals' current policies. So like we said, we talked about that, maintaining that. Streamlining credential recognition. This is an interesting one. So lots of times, and they specifically talk about foreign trained professionals being able to work in Canada in their field. Well, why would we make it more difficult? Like, and looking at trying to streamline that. And often credential recognition is a provincial matter once again, but stepping in, tying funding, whether it's transfer payments or whatever it might be, grants, you know, any federal government with the tax dollars that are there, how they're distributed to the provinces, are often tied to certain expectations. And so, you know, we're hoping that, you know, that's something that might be possible that will open up doors, whether it's nurses and doctors, or whether it's even trade certification, right? Because Alberta, for instance, is one of the provinces that has the most strict trade requirements to work in certain, regulated trades, whether it's welders or whether it's, mechanics or whatnot. These are often compulsory trades where you need to have trade certification before you can work in them in Canada. So there has to be a softening there. And we look at, enhanced support for temporary foreign workers. This is something that I think goes counter to the narrative that's being spelled out right now. The conservative platform, as far as I can see, acknowledges that economic contributions of temporary foreign workers are important. And so I'm not as concerned about that world. I think the corruption and things that have kind of filtered into our temporary foreign worker program, for instance, I think that's what's led to a lot of this. But If we get a conservative government and they're able to rein in some of the inflation and some of the issues, and jobs are actually being created and labor shortages start to come back again. Well, the reality is a lot of the positions, at least within food service and other retail and trade and are filled by post-grad work permit holders on open work permits. And if they are unable to secure permanent resident status, well, the option for them to remain are very low. And that's what the Liberal government is counting on, that the PR pathways will not be there, so people will just go home, which if people leave in mass because their temporary status is expired, well, then those residences, those homes, those rental places will then become more available. And it will kind of deal with some of the infrastructure problems that are perceived to be going on right now. And so, but yeah, within the Conservatives' policies, they're actually focused more on enhancing support for temporary foreign workers, including exploring PR pathways, for permanent residents that meet Canada's economic needs. Which, where have we heard this? This is in line with what the Liberals are trying to do right now. One of the differences, at least at this stage, has been the Conservatives' emphasis on more enhanced screening and security. So they are all over the Liberals when some individual who just, bad actors, bad dudes are allowed in because of a policy that doesn't properly screen. They're all over that. And so what steps could they take to enhance the screening and security? Well, anytime they talk about enhancing and taking more time, it means processing times are going to climb. And there was a big push and lots of pressure on everyone, by everyone on the Liberal government, to speed up processing. And right now, Igor, if you look at it, for an extension application in Canada, it shouldn't take that long to extend a work permit in Canada, right? And if I was to go here and let's just slide over and look at the processing times, I want to show you this. So if we look at the processing times for immigration, and this is not a security issue, okay? This is a capacity issue or a desire or a focus issue or a personnel issue. But if we look at the processing times for a work permit extension, so we'll go to work permits from outside, study, work permit inside, initial and an extension, and we get processing times. Oh my goodness, Igor. Do you see this? 166 days to process the extension of a work permit. So they feel, well, these people are already here, so they're still going to be working. So we need to prioritize our time to other areas. But 166 days. If we go back here and look at a visitor visa from outside Canada, and then it says, where are you applying from? Let's go to our favorite place. Let's go to India and say if you're applying for a visitor visa from India, 113 days for a visitor visa. So things are just really struggling. And so as you're trying to map this out and say, okay, well, what does the future hold? If the Conservative government says, okay, we're going to start, enhancing the security screening to make sure that we're really weeding out anyone that shouldn't be here, that's a security risk or otherwise inadmissible, well, it's going to increase processing times. We've seen that in the world of permanent residence with our Chinese clients, right, that are subject to more heightened security screening. And so those PR applications can really stall out. Then we look at support for refugee processing. Are the Conservatives just anti-refugee? No, they're not, Igor. The Conservatives, in fact, they just believe in maintaining Canada's humanitarian, the commitments. And this is let me continue the thought. Maintaining those commitments, but in their mind, just making sure that the process is fair, efficient, and focused on those most in need. Well, how do you determine that? They intend to prioritize UN Convention refugees and improve appeals processes for greater system integrity. And that's just, that's just kind of some basic, thoughts that we've, some members of the party have shared. But traditionally that has been it. They've never canceled those programs, but they've definitely been much more careful in the how they administer it, such that it's not kind of wide open. We've seen with Mexican nationals, there have been a huge spike, or there had been a huge spike in refugee claims when Canada dropped the visa requirements for Mexico, and the Conservatives had put those in place. And so those are examples of, I could see, tightening of measures, making it more difficult to get visitor visa to come in order to try to manage the influx of what some people would consider refugee claims that are not genuine. And obviously there's, a mechanism in place, including discussion that I had before about an appeal process that, really opens up more options for individuals who are seeking to challenge negative decisions. Their goal is to just be more careful, I guess. One interesting one I want to throw out, I guess number 7 on my list of ones that we're talking about here, is revising birthright by citizenship. And this is a tough one. And, optically, their view is we only want citizens who have a connection to Canada. And usually their view is that's as long as one parent is a Canadian citizen, then of course we'll recognize that birth of their child if the other parent is not a Canadian citizen. So the granting of citizenship, which is how it is now. But we also have the ability for 2 foreign nationals to come, have a child in Canada, and then that child obtains Canadian citizenship. And there's very good reasons why we do that, Igor. In some cases, depending upon the circumstances, maybe that child becomes stateless if Canada doesn't grant it citizenship. Maybe there's rules, or, their parents have made certain decisions that have kind of put them in their status in limbo. Well, that child would then be born stateless. And so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about that, but the Conservatives have, shown support for limiting that birthright citizenship. Just trying to tackle the world of birth tourism, which is a real thing. All right. And then finally, improved funding for settlement services. So, if you can get the numbers in check and be more careful in who on the intake of people, then there's going to be a greater ability for those settlement organizations to actually help people. And there was nothing more troubling to listen to than the government stating all these policies that are meant to recognize Canada as a safe haven in the world, and that's all wonderful, and I think Canadians take pride in that. But if you do not have a mechanism in place to help the people come, get settled, and get a good step up so they can succeed, you're actually doing them a disservice. And I think that's kind of where I'm at with even the economic folks who come study, work, and then hope to get PR. Well, in many cases, people come to study and couldn't even find a place to live. We've got stories of people cramming into, small residences, and then you can't find a job after your school is done on your 3-year work permits. And so all of these things are really going to create a lot of uncertainty for people. And Igor, if you were to kind of summarize and kind of coalesce all of this, would there be kind of 1 or 2 thoughts that you'd have that you could share with people that are in Canada right now, in terms of what they can try to do to better their situation, or at least prepare for what's to come? What thoughts do you have?
Yeah, probably I will start with those who have had H-1B visas and got work permits, and essentially this advice would apply to everyone, is nurture the relationship with your employer. And if possible, try to seek the support from the employer to get an LMIA, because without the LMIA, it's going to be challenging to remain here. Your open work permit will expire. You cannot claim job offer points typically if you're on a work permit. And we've seen a couple of consults in the last couple of weeks where people mistakenly claimed 50 points in their profile, and only after the consult they realized that they actually don't have those 50 points. So that is important. So be very careful with that. But LMAAs would be the way to go, even despite all of the restrictions and the refusal to process LMAs in certain census metropolitan areas. Second, for those people who are in Canada, you really, the next step you want to do, and maybe perhaps that's the first step, you want to go to our YouTube channel and our Canadian Immigration podcast and take a look at our Time's Up series. And we've talked about it before. because in that series of podcast episodes, we discuss different options available to you, and we talk about each option in detail. So that probably would be your step number one for those who are in Canada. You will understand what options are typically available and what are the common mistakes that you can make with each type of the application. Second, third, for some people, there's just nothing that we can suggest. And I recently had a consultation that resulted in a 1-star review, and I'm open to talk about it because essentially we're not magicians. Immigration, like lawyers in general, are seen like as fixers, as long as you have money, you come to a lawyer can fix it. The lawyer will suggest you the pathway that goes around the rules, bend the rules. That's not what we do. That only happens in Suits and other movies about
TV shows.
Lawyers. So we tell you how to follow the rules, how to not make mistake, and what not to do. And sometimes when people come to us and say, I want to remain here longer in Canada, can you recommend something to me? Sometimes there's nothing to recommend but to go back and maybe try again a little bit later. And for some people, and more people, that will be the advice we give. People are not happy with this, obviously, but that's the reality. And the reality, as we've discussed throughout this whole episode today, will change in the next year, and then after elections in Canada. So we'll see two different worlds in the next couple of years. Mostly they will be about the same, but like the second world after the elections in Canada might be even tougher. So if you have an opportunity to act now, do it now, because after the elections, probably the last doors will be closing in.
Andy says IRCC is estimating that close to 1 million people will leave Canada after the immigration cuts for 2025 to 2027. Yeah, and that's, the reality is, Andy, I don't even pay attention to those levels plans. I look at 2025 because it's likely we won't have an election before then. But for 2026, 2027, we can have a whole new government making a decision on those levels plans. I'm not sure if they will have time if we have an election the end of October, November, whatever it might be. Because the levels plans are supposed to be, released at the beginning of November or before. And so it's probably unlikely that they'll have a direct impact on 2026, but it's you indicate here that I doubt it. I think they will apply for H&C or go underground. Well, I think we've already started seeing that, people applying for H&C or claiming refugee status, which we're going to cover all of that within our Time's Up series. We're going to talk about those different programs in depth. In fact, Igor and I are going to be recording a podcast episode right after we're done here that specifically targets you postgrad work permit holders and, the realities that you're going to have to face, but also possible options that might exist that you hadn't thought of. So we're definitely going to be covering those. So stay tuned for that. Like we said, the impact of Trump here on his election victory, the impact on what's going to happen in Canada is going to be real. And, all the things that we've talked about today in this particular little live stream, yes, it's speculative, but the signs are all there. And so, just make sure whatever you guys do that you try to keep as many options open as possible. That's what we do in our consultations. We canvass everything, we lay everything out. And but one thing's for certain, the Liberal government are making it more and more difficult for you to be able to stay. As simple as that. So,
and Mark, we've seen
Igor.
a spike in consults where people ask about the H&C as their only pathway. And for some people, H&C may be an available option, but you have to keep in mind that H&C is an exceptional measure and not everyone qualifies for it. Like everyone can submit an application who is in Canada. From outside Canada, that's a little bit different story. But if we're talking about people from inside Canada, everyone can submit an application, spend a year or two waiting, and extend their status this way. But you have to understand that if your application is meritless and is ultimately refused, if you put yourself in the officer's shoes and you were questioned with whether to admit the person who applied for the agency before on a temporary status to Canada, let's say your application is refused, you leave Canada and you want to come back as a visitor, would you approve that application? Most likely not, right? Because where's the guarantee that you will not apply for the agency again? So agency is something that you might want to consider only in exceptional situations. And we have some clients that we are working with. Some of them are Ukrainians. Some of them are from different countries. We had a client from Japan, from Mexico. We might have another one from a different Middle Eastern country. We do really tough assessment. Like we are really critical whether this agency application can be successful or not. And we always tell the person, what if your application is refused? What is your plan?
What's your
going
plan?
Underground? Like, trust me, I used to live in New York. I know how there are many people who live without status in New York, but that is possible because employers are willing to hire undocumented immigrants for cash. And the whole system, the whole sanctuary city status allows to do that. And, it is the environment where you can at least maintain a good standard of living with, I don't recall exactly, was it Obamacare or Medicare? I'm confused with different health policies. But if you are undocumented in the United States, you still can get some medical treatment. You get the benefits card. You can get your driver's license. There are many ways how you can survive without a status. I have no idea how people in Canada live without status.
Here.
It's a very different country, and it's not easy. So for those people who say, oh, I'm just going to stay underground, I will just apply for the refugee, who cares if they refuse it, I'm just going to hide, I'm going to move to the cave in Nunavut somewhere. That's not going to work. Different climate, different socioeconomic and political reality in the country. Not as many people are willing to hire without documents. The control from the government and taxes and many other economic reasons would prevent people from just living a normal life here in Canada without documents.
Camby's World here says, hey, Mark, I got my PR started living in Canada in BC. Now working abroad, we're now working on board Canadian ferries. All thanks to your videos out there on YouTube and kindness to always respond on live. Our pleasure, Camby. Thank you so much. I love when people chime in and just, reconnect with us even after their journey for PR has been successful. So he says, hello, we're in the process of applying for a humanitarian program with you. Says, I am a bit worried about the US election and its possible impact on Ukraine and our application. I hope for the best. Any thoughts on that, Igor?
Oh yeah.
For our clients here?
Oh yeah. So just recently I have had like 3 clients from Ukraine applying for the agency. We didn't submit the application for 2 of those, but one of the applications is already submitted. And the rationale is to apply for the agency as soon as possible, because we will see a change in circumstances, whether for good or for worse, in the next little while. Like, I don't have doubts that the next 2 months will determine how the war in Ukraine ends. And the officer, when they assess the agency application, they look at the circumstances at the time of the assessment, not at the time of submission, which is a little bit different. For example, if you have a dependent child, as long as you submit the application before your dependent child turns 22, your dependent child will be considered as dependent throughout the processing of your application. But when the officer assesses your application, and the circumstances that you relied on when you submitted the agency application are longer present, then the officer can say, look, there are no reasons why I would approve this application because the circumstances are no longer there.
Right.
However, it's important to mention, and Serhi wanted to give you a kudos and say that I'm still hopeful with your application. And the reason why is because you always have to keep in mind that there are many different factors that the officer is looking at. And war in Ukraine and political environment is just one of the factors. Your establishment in Canada is a different thing. Your ability to return to Ukraine is a factor, but that's not a decisive one. Whether there is a still active warfare, it is a factor, but not a decisive one. When you speak about active bombing and shelling, that's one thing. But when you portray to the officer that, look, even if the missiles don't fly overhead anymore, there's thousands of landmines, millions of those landmines. There are economic poverty in the country. The country's crumbling to and trying to survive after the war.
Yeah.
So all of those conditions are still relevant, even if the active warfare is no longer present.
Yeah.
So for people who consider applying for the agency from Ukraine, yes, it is important, but it's not decisive. If you can submit an application as soon as possible, I'd urge you to do it right now, because who knows how long it will take the officer to assess your application, and who knows how long the Trump administration will try to fix the war in Ukraine. We don't know.
We do know that that Trump here had said if he was the president, the war never would have started. You know, that's some of the comments. He definitely is pretty confident in his abilities. So we'll see what happens. Maybe, you know, just the fact that him becoming president, and, you know, maybe that may clear all of that up. And you're right, Igor. We know that right now the pathways to permanent residence for many Ukraine nationals on open quit work permits is very limited, very limited. Okay, let's do a fire fast round through some of the last little questions that I've highlighted here, and then we'll wrap it up for today. Camby's World says, Mark, don't you think the PR system for parents and grandparents of PR holders must be increased? This is a tough one. There's only, once again, there is only so many that the cabinet aligns for certain classes of immigrants, and parents and grandparents have, you know, there was a time when they only allowed in 15,000 every year. And so I don't think that's something that we're going to see is an increase. Let's see here. Vulcan says, why IRCC hasn't started to use AI in their applications review in order to speed the process. So Igor, what's your comments on the use of AI?
The reason why they didn't start using AI to speed up processing is because they already use it.
Yes,
they already use it for years and years now. And their AI system is called Chinook. And again, like, nobody saw how it looks like visually, but we do know that it is an Excel-based tool that allows the officer to see all of the applications assigned to the officer in bulk and see red flags and green flags, and allows for faster processing of the application. So the system does not approve or refuse your application, but it assists the officer in making a faster decision on your application. And that resulted in a whole bunch of different problems. And we've seen a lot of cases in federal court where people were trying to blame Chinook for rendering a negative decision, and court kept refusing those arguments, saying that Chinook does not make a decision, it's the officer. And the officer may use whatever tools they find necessary. If they find using Grammarly necessary to writing their letters, then they can use it, right? If they need an Excel-based tool to help them, they can also use it. Whatever tool you use, as long as you as the officer make a final decision, is justified. Essentially, that's the position of the court. So we've seen a lot of refusals that were never supposed to come if the officer actually sat there and read the whole submission, but it just doesn't happen anymore.
No, they just don't have time. at least the way it's structured. Shirag says, there was a podcast of yours which talked on options and risks like marriage of convenience, under the table job risks, and that podcast gave me a whole new and better vision. So just to reiterate to everyone, if we shift back over here to our screens, the Time's Up series, the high cost of staying in Canada illegally, is the one. But if you go to our website, obviously there's some questions here that some people are asking that really you should book a consult with us. But aside from that, if you go to our blogs, you can see our podcast is right here. And so if you want to just listen to it, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, it's available there. Google doesn't, I don't think Google Podcasts exists anymore. But our Time's Up series are all here. So high cost of staying in Canada legally, you can subscribe to the podcast as well. Or like I said, you can watch the podcast episode in video form. We're just trying to make this accessible to as many people as possible. All right, a couple other things. So thanks, Shrag. I appreciate that that shout out for that. For that series. Okay, a couple other things. This is an example here. Crypto says, my AIP PR application, my employer has withdrawn their job offer. My eligibility has already been passed and only the final decision is pending. Please advise. I'm gonna just ring, I think, let's see. Let's turn up our audio here. I've got it muted here. Bear with me. So this one, that little triangle says slide over and book a consultation right here. And it's really easy to do. Anywhere on our site you can find it. But once you get to that page, you can just click on book a consult and then you can choose which lawyer you want to book it with. And you can literally do it right now. So those who are asking specific questions like crypto, we need more information to be able to give you advice. So I recommend that you book a consult. Okay, and then Rafki says, it's been 8 months waiting for a visa. I know, and it's not going to change. Processing times, whether it's Africa or whether it's India, even in Canada, everywhere, it's just increasing. And I'll be honest, I don't really know why, other than they're not hiring enough officers to process and the volumes are increasing markedly. Okay, and then same thing here for CRAM. Hi, Mark and Igor. Today I applied AAIP nomination extension. However, I paid the service fee before submitting. The request status now still payment pending. What to do? I only have 24 hours. If you go into the consult thing right here, book a consult right away, and we can go in and we can take a look at it and try to help you resolve it. So if you click on our link, usually, I'm not sure what we have blocked off. I've got some stuff this afternoon, but today is Wednesday. I don't know if Igor or either of us have consults, but if you send an email to, let's see if I can pull this up right here, info@holthelaw.com. And let's just jump back here. You can probably see a little bit better here. But if you send an email to info@holthelaw.com, then you just let them know, hey, I'm trying to book a consult, but there isn't availability. And can you get me in sooner? And maybe Igor or I can squeeze you in today, given the tight timelines. All right. I think, Igor, for the most part, I think that kind of covers it. There is a ton of change coming. We know it's coming. And for those of you who are wondering what the future holds, just continue to watch. We'll try to share what we learn as things, morph into new either positive or negative realities for people. We'll try to share that as soon as we can. All right. Any last minute thoughts, Igor, before we wrap up this 2024 U.S. election? How will Trump impact Canadian immigration? This particular episode. What? Any last comments?
One last comment. Buckle up.
Buckle up. That's a great. Yeah, I like that. All right. I also want to just thank the 2024 Express Entry Accelerator. The Accelerator is the sponsor of this little podcast, this live stream. And all you have to do is go here to the Canadian Immigration Institute, check out our courses, and you will see that there is the Express Entry Accelerator right here that you can subscribe to. Also, you'll see here that we have a free PDF guide that is all about the common Express Entry mistakes and how to avoid them. Absolutely go check this out. It is awesome. It's just a fantastic little product that Igor helped put together. And so if you haven't done that, go check it out. It's right here on the Canadian Immigration Institute website.
Yeah.
All right,
and
guys.
Mark, we can also mention you can now become an affiliate of Canadian Immigration Institute.
Oh, that's right. we'll turn our music down a little bit here. I forgot about that. Right at the top, you'll see here, become an affiliate. So if you have been one of our past students that has subscribed to the course and taken it, attended the master classes, you can now come here, or not, even if you're just a Canadian who's looking to earn a little extra money, we offer an affiliate commission of 30% for anyone who subscribes to the courses. And with that being said, if we go, back to our courses here, you will see, and I better not forget it, there is a brand new Canadian temporary resident visa course that is also awesome that we encourage you to go check out and take a look at. All right. That's it for now. I think, you guys, thanks for tuning in. We will be back as always every Wednesday from 10 to 11 a.m. Mountain Time. Thanks for joining, Igor.
Yeah. Okay. See you later.